You don't lose a career over a weapon or a bag of drugs. Not usually. You lose it over a candy bar somebody slides through the bars. Something so small you'd feel a little stupid saying no to it. You know the policy says refuse. You do it anyway, and nothing happens. No report, no consequence, no one even mentions it again. Except now, an inmate knows something about you your supervisor doesn't. You'll forget that moment by next week. He won't. And a $5 favor is about to become one of the more expensive decisions of your career. Most correctional officers never come close to this. They do the job exactly the way you'd hope. Decades on the floor, never once taking a bribe, never once looking the other way. This isn't their story. It's a pattern documented often enough that the FBI built an entire initiative around it, because gang-driven corruption in prisons rarely starts with a crime. It starts with a compromise small enough that nobody treats it as the beginning of anything. And once that leverage exists, the prison stops being the only authority behind those walls. Here's what people get wrong about how this actually works. Nobody's corrupt from day one. It's a string of small decisions, each one easy to justify on its own, each one making the next one a little easier to say yes to. The item never matters. What matters is the answer to one question. Will you bend a rule when the cost feels like nothing? Say no, and it usually ends there. Say yes, and somebody just found your boundary. And boundaries once found, get tested again. Now picture your third double shift this week. Mandatory overtime. Again. Your check's already spent before it clears. Experienced inmates clock all of it. Who's exhausted, who's distracted, who's carrying something heavier than the job itself. None of that makes a man corrupt on its own. Plenty of officers under exactly that pressure never cross a line. But pressure bends judgment, and gangs are patient enough to wait for the bend. Around the time investigators were running Operation Ghost Guard, starting pay for correctional officers in parts of Georgia sat around $24,000 a year. In Mississippi, entry-level officers made little enough to qualify for food assistance. That doesn't excuse what happens next. It explains why investigators kept finding officers under real financial strain when they traced these cases back. But money isn't usually what traps someone. Leverage is. The favor doesn't disappear. Someone remembers it. Not a supervisor, another inmate. Now there's a witness. That's when the real ask shows up. A charger, some tobacco, a SIM card, eventually the phone itself. Refuse, and the terms get spelled out plainly. Report us, or we report you. Nobody builds that trap overnight. It's built one compromise at a time, which means at every step, there was still a version of the officer who could have walked away. That window just kept closing. Investigators have seen that pattern play out in case after case. One of the clearest examples came during Operation Ghost Guard. Investigators alleged that some correctional officers were paid roughly $500 to $1,000 for each smuggled phone. Between 2014 and 2015, authorities seized more than 23,500 contraband phones from a Georgia prison population of roughly 50,000 inmates. 46 correctional officers across 9 prisons were eventually indicted. So why would anyone risk a career for a phone? Because once a smartphone gets behind prison walls, it stops being just a phone. To investigators, it becomes a communication hub, a recruiting tool, sometimes even a command center. Federal cases have linked contraband phones to identity theft, wire fraud, drug trafficking, witness intimidation, extortion, and other criminal activity coordinated from inside prison. That's why investigators often describe cell phones as some of the most dangerous contraband that can enter a correctional facility. It's not the device itself. It's everything the device makes possible. One of the clearest examples came from the Baltimore City Detention Center. Federal prosecutors alleged that members of the Black Guerrilla Family had turned parts of the jail into an operational base, with correctional officers accused of helping move phones and other contraband through the facility. 25 people were indicted, including 13 correctional officers, accused of accepting cash and gifts in exchange for smuggling contraband. The FBI's special agent in charge summarized the investigation with a sentence that made headlines across the country. The inmates literally took over the asylum. But there's another tactic investigators have warned about that's even harder to defend against. The FBI has documented cases in which incarcerated gang members encouraged associates with clean criminal records to apply for correctional officer positions. No criminal history. Nothing unusual during a background check. From the prison's perspective, they're hiring a qualified applicant. From the gang's perspective, they may be placing someone inside years before investigators have any reason to suspect them. You can search a uniform, you can search a vehicle, you can search a prison cell. You can't run a metal detector over somebody's intentions. One phone becomes 10. 10 become a network becomes an economy. Eventually, the gang doesn't need to escape the prison. It has influence inside it. By the time investigators uncover how deeply the corruption reaches, the walls are still standing exactly where they always were. But some of the people those walls were supposed to protect are now helping the criminal enterprise instead. Most correctional officers never become part of this story. Many refuse every offer they're ever given. Many report bribery attempts immediately, sometimes at real personal risk. This isn't a story about weak people. It's a story about how organized crime looks for small opportunities. It all started with a candy bar. Nobody thought it mattered. By the time anyone realized it did, the prison had another doorway for organized crime. That's how quietly corruption begins. In the next video, we'll go inside Operation Ghost Guard itself, how a single smuggling scheme expanded into a federal investigation spanning 9 Georgia prisons, and what ultimately exposed it. If you've worked in corrections, I'd genuinely like to hear whether this matches what you've seen, or whether the reality is different. If you've had a loved one incarcerated, did contraband phones change how safe you felt they were? And for everyone else, what surprised you most? The salaries correctional officers were earning, or how something as small as a candy bar could become the first step in a much larger criminal operation?